I encourage people to read. I've read many books in my lifetime, and I'm going to carry on reading. I've probably read over 1,000 books, and one of the books that had one of the most profound impacts on me in the way I view the world was the Gulag Archipelago, and that was written by Aleksandra Solzhenitsyn. The book is about 2,000 pages long. I first read the book in 1995 when I was doing some sport in Romania, in Bucharest, and I had some time on my hands and I started reading it. And I've since read the book a couple of times, and it's quite a powerful book. And if you haven't read it already, I encourage you to read it, but whilst I encourage you to read it, do bear in mind it's quite powerful. And I mentioned the book because it had a big impact in my life, in the way I saw the world. And getting away from the political aspect of the book, purely from the point of view of how strong the human spirit is, and also how in the worst people, in the nastiest people, there is that ounce of good, and also in the best people there is that element of evil. And I think the importance of speaking your truth, and the importance of having a purpose and a meaning in your life to help overcome adversity. And there's some of the things that I took away which aren't exhaustive, and in the time we've gotten, I'll speak to you about the impact of finding meaning and looking for the strength of character to overcome your challenges rather than an easy way out. I'll make my points across and you'll get what you get out of it, and if you've read it you'll get what you get out of it, and other people have their own perspective on the situation. Now, cutting a long story short, Aleksandra Solzhenitsyn, reflecting and drawing on his experience, and he is fighting on the Russian front against Germany in World War II. And you can imagine, or one couldn't imagine, how horrendous that would have been. He gets taken as a prisoner by the Germans, and whilst in that environment, one couldn't even begin to imagine how harsh it would have been. But the war ended, and after the war ended, he went back to Russia, and rather than get a welcome, or a hero's welcome, any sort of welcome, he then gets put into a camp, a prison camp. The war ends, he gets released from the German camp, and he gets taken into a Russian camp. And that may have been down to the ideology that Stalin had, that the prisoners of wars, from the Russian point of view, who had experienced the West, may have been contaminated to their thought process. And one can only guess what was going through or what the ideology of Stalin was, but all things said and done, and getting away from the political aspect of it, he then goes into the Russian camp, and it's really, really powerful stuff. And these returning prisoners get taken into that camp, and not only those returning prisoners, in the book he talks about other people who got taken into the camp between I think the period of 1919 to 1960 even. But one can only imagine the horrendous conditions in the camp, and he talks about it, the conditions and the adversity experience. And on top of that, he actually had cancer too. And you can only imagine no food, the harsh conditions, the way he would have been treated. And some of the stories and the reflections that he talks about were so powerful that he finds a way to liberate himself from that, at least mentally, and writes the Gulag Archipelago. And that wasn't the only book he wrote. He's written other books too, and he's a prolific writer. He would go on to win the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature as well, because it's such a powerful writing. And it shows that in the face of adversity, if somehow we can liberate ourselves from the narrative and find a way, whatever that adversity is, and obviously the adversity that Aleksandra Solzhenitsyn experienced is probably an adversity most of us will never experience, but we've all got our own list of adversity we experience. And for me, sometimes we forget that one drop of water can rise an entire ocean. Your life matters. Speaking your truth matters. Standing up. Now, a grain of sand, for example, might not make a beach, but what's a beach without a collective set of grains of sand? And the pen is sometimes mightier than the sword, our thoughts. And one thing to think about, whilst Aleksandra Solzhenitsyn would have been writing the book, I doubt very much he would have had pen and paper, so a lot of it would have been collected in his own thoughts as well. So it shows how powerful it was, because obviously there was no way for him to store any of that. And there's a big irony as well, without sort of getting political, that obviously communism would fall, and Aleksandra Solzhenitsyn would end up living many years beyond that, and that's another story for another day. But the point being is that sometimes we just got to keep going. And for me, one of the biggest learnings I had, which aren't exhaustive, was we can look for the easy way out, whatever that easy way out is, and life becomes even harder eventually, or life becomes even more challenging, or we can sort of find that strength to meet any challenge that comes our way, and that real strength of human spirit, that under certain conditions we see how strong human will is. And you might think as an individual you don't make much of a difference, yet all that said and done, it's like throwing a pebble in the lake. You can make a ripple. And I think it's really important that, you know, being true to yourself and looking for that strength of character. So if you haven't read the book, it's a really powerful read. In my opinion, I think that the book should be made available for every secondary student to read, at least in college, because I think it's such a powerful book. And, you know, steering away from the political side of it, just purely to illustrate, if history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, obviously. But equally in saying that, I think would be a big eye-opener for young people. But that's another story for another day. But equally, it is a very, very powerful and impact book. And whilst the lessons I learned from reading the book and having read the book a couple of times, discussed today, aren't exhaustive, one of the powerful lessons I learned is how powerful one person can be, and also how strong the human spirit is in the face of adversity. Thank you. Live with passion. Boom.